everybody, it's Rebecca here at Wine Mermaids, and today I'm going to be recommending some books. So I'm part of the Goodreads group monthly recommendations started by Trina at Between Chapters and Kayla Rain, and this is a group where every month we have a topic and we recommend books to fit that topic. It's a great group, it's a great way to kind of mention other books and get recommendations for these different topics, and I love it. So this month's topic is fantasy. I love fantasy. Fantasy is one of my top favorite genres to read. If I'm gonna go pick up a book, 9 times out of 10 it's probably gonna be fantasy, or maybe 8 times out of 10. I do like a lot of fiction as well. But anyway, so we're gonna talk about fantasy today because I really love it. And so there's two, in my mind, I kind of split it up in two different ways. There is fantasy where it's magical realism kind of fantasy, where it's like magic within the real world, which I tend to love a little bit more. I found when I've looked at my reading habits that I tend to read more of it because I think I like to find the magic in my everyday life more than I do diving into a completely made up world, which I also love, and that's the other kind of subgenre topic I'm going to talk about today. So these two different ones, so ones that take place in our world with magic in it, and then some that take place in a completely different world. So we're going to start off with the ones that take place in our world. So it's kind of, it's like beginning a little bit, because it's like if you're a little testing the waters of fantasy, maybe you don't want to leave the comfort of the real world just yet. So we're going to start off with the ones in the real world that have some magic. So first off, I'm going to talk about Harry Potter because duh, it's Harry Potter. I'm not going to talk long about Harry Potter though because it's Harry Potter, and if you don't know anything about Harry Potter, then it's about a boy who's 11, who finds out he's a wizard and goes to wizarding school, and it's changed my life and a lot of other people's lives and the world as we know it. So Harry Potter. So it starts out in the Muggle world, and then which is the non-magic world, for those of you who don't know. It starts out in the Muggle world and goes to the magic world, and it is awesome. The next one I'm going to mention is the Chronicles of Narnia, which also starts out in the real world, and they travel through a magic wardrobe in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe into the land of Narnia and have their adventure. So it's like a made-up world within the real world, and I love that. It's like I can escape from my real world and go in, you know, discover Narnia or get my Hogwarts letter or whatever. I can do all of that within these type of stories. And Chronicles of Narnia is about 4 kids, brothers and sisters, who travel into Narnia and kind of have to restore faith and justice a little bit. And they're all of their adventures. There are 7 books, and the first one, I would start out with Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Personal recommendation. You could also start with Magician's Nephew, but it's more of like the prequel, like the backstory. Anyway, the next one I'm going to mention is the one that really got me into reading, I think. I don't even know this, but I'm going to say it. When I was younger, I was really obsessed with Animorphs, and I think this is slightly more sci-fi, but we're just going to go with it. And Animorphs is a middle grade fantasy series or sci-fi series about these teenagers, these kids who stumble upon an alien and help him, and he gives them the power to change into animals. And who doesn't want to be an animal? I want to turn into animals. So they're trying to defeat an evil alien race that has to like take over humans. It's really cool. That's why it's a little bit more sci-fi, I think. But I'm including it because I don't care and I love it. And it takes place in this world, but aliens are here and you can turn into animals, and that's really cool. I'm also going to mention some Neil Gaiman here because what is a fantasy recommendations video without Neil Gaiman? And I recently did a Year of Gaiman project, which the video is still, it's in the works, it's coming. And so I have to include some Neil Gaiman because those are all magical realism. They start in our world and go into a different world or have magical elements in our world itself. And so I'm going to specifically recommend The Graveyard Book, which is a retelling of The Jungle Book about a little boy who lives in a graveyard, and he's kind of walking in between the worlds of the dead and the undead, and it's really cool. And so yeah, it's real world, but he's kind of dealing with some ghosts and some magical things like that. It's pretty cool. And the other Neil Gaiman I'm going to talk about is Ocean at the End of the Lane, which is another really good one for people who are just kind of starting out into fantasy. It's one of the best Neil Gaiman books I've ever read, one of my favorite books of all time, and it's just really good. Actually, I'm going to mention a third because this is more advanced fantasy, and that's American Gods because it's so good. It's basically what if all the gods were real. what if they were real? And they're like walking around and they live as long as people believe in them, and it's like all the gods that people in America have brought over here, and it talks about the heritage and like what it really means to be an American, which is interesting since Neil Gaiman is British, but I think it's really interesting and really fun, and it's got lots of weird things happening in a real world situation. Now on to the fantasy books that take place in a world of their own. There is no real world in them. It is all made up with, usually there's maps at the beginning, and it's really cool, and they have like magical elements like dragons sometimes and cool things, and so it take a little bit longer to get into because you really do have to acclimate yourself to that world a lot more than you would in the ones that kind of start out in the real world. So they're slightly more advanced in some way, but you really do get to escape, and that's what fantasy sometimes is all about. So the first one, of course, is Game of Thrones, because this is a massive world with so much detail. There's a book about the detail, just about all the backstory. There are 7 books, supposedly going to be 7. There are 5 currently out. There's a TV show. It's amazing. Everybody you know will die, and you will cry and hate them and love to hate them, and it is awesome. Of course, there's Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings is a classic fantasy series, and The Hobbit as well. They go together. They go together. They do take a little bit more time to kind of get into and read, just because the writing is older, and so I think it took me like 10 years or 15 years to actually read The Hobbit, but once I did, I really loved it. And The Lord of the Rings is kind of the same thing. It's a lot of detail, but it's very rich. He made up languages, like a bunch of them. It's really cool, and there's just so much detail and depth and story, and it's just beautiful, and it's a classic fantasy series if you're looking for that. 2 left. Next up, I'm going to mention the Gentleman Bastards series by Scott Lynch. The first one is The Lies of Locke Lamora. I've only read The Lies of Locke Lamora in this series so far, and it took me like a month, but it was well worth it. It's really long, and this is about a thief who steals from the rich and kind of keeps it all, but they don't do anything with the money. It's not like they're just like trying to be rich. They're just stealing because they feel like that's their duty to do it. And so he puts on all these cons. It's really interesting. There's a lot of like layers in this story, and so there's not as much like magic as there is. It's a different world. It's a fantasy world, and there's a little bit of creepy mystical things happening in it, but most of it is just, it's like a thief in a fantasy world with crazy other thieves and danger and bad stuff, and it's really, really good. Really good. And the final one I'm going to mention to you, I'm currently binge reading. I started it right before the new year and the first book, and I'm currently on the second book right now, and this is the Lumatere Chronicles, which is Finnikin of the Rock by Melina Marchetti. The Finnikin of the Rock is the first book, Froy of the Exiles is the second one, and then there's a third one, Quintana of Sharon, I think is what it's called. Anyway, it's a trilogy, and I love it. It was on my TBR for like a year, I think, and then I was like, oh, whatever, and then I got it from the library, and I was like, oh, whatever, and then I read it. And it's changed it. I love it so much. It's about a guy named Finnikin, and his land, his country has pretty much has a curse on it, and nobody can enter, nobody can leave. There's like the royals were all killed, and he has to bring balance back. It's kind of like the chosen one, but in a way. It's got twists, it's got turns, it's got some great female characters, and it is just wonderful. There's so much depth, there's so many great characters and world building, there's growth. It's just so good, and you should all read it. So anyway, those are my fantasy recommendations. So if you like fantasy, you should check them out. If you have any good ones that I haven't read, please let me know in the comments below, because I need more fantasy in my life. Apparently I don't have enough. There's never enough. There's never enough. Anyway, let me know, and that's it for me today. I'll see you next time.